The civilian death toll from the war in Ukraine continues to mount as Russian and Ukrainian forces battle for control of the country. Russian missile strikes in the southern city of Mykolaiv were answered with Ukrainian shelling in the occupied region of Kherson. Meanwhile, concern is mounting in Washington as Moscow appears to be turning to Iran for military equipment. Neil O'Reilly has the latest.
Along the front line between Ukrainian and Russian forces, civilians continue to bear the brunt of Russian attacks. In recent days, residential areas have been hit from Kyiv in the north to Kherson in the south. Dozens have been killed in separate strikes across the region. Among those whose homes have been hit, an elderly woman near Kyiv.
People are not to blame for the fact that they have such a president like Putin. I wish he was dead, the parasite.
Elsewhere, Russia is claiming several civilians have died in a Ukrainian rocket attack in Novokakhovka. The Ukrainian military said it was a precision strike on an ammunition depot. Neither claim has been independently verified. On the ground, the war grinds on, with Russia making only small territorial gains. Progress is slow, and Ukrainian soldiers are determined to hold the line.
We will win anyway. Just what will be the price? The more weapons we receive, the less they begin to shoot. Their ammunition depots are running low. They don't really shoot in response.
With both sides running low on vital military equipment, the US says Russia has turned to Iran for supplies of unmanned attack drones.
National interest and for the American people. It's unclear whether Iran has delivered any of these UAVs to Russia already. But this is just one example of how Russia is looking to countries like Iran for capabilities that are also being used, I might add, or have been used before we got the ceasefire in place in Yemen, to attack Saudi Arabia.
A shortage of drones and other high-tech weaponry may affect both sides' ability to wage war. But there's no sign yet that it will lessen the resolve to keep fighting. Neil O'Reilly, Euronews.
All right, well, let's get the view now of Dr. Sanam Vakil, who is the Deputy Head of the Middle East and North Africa Programme at Chatham House in the United Kingdom. Good to have you with us, Dr. Vakil. Welcome to the programme. Of course, since the beginning of the war, Ukraine has received weapons from Western allies. What would Iran supplying drones apparently to Russia now? Now tell us about how global this war has become.
Nice to be with you, first of all. Secondly, to answer your question, the Iran angle adds to a complicated landscape. Iran is regionally under pressure from sanctions due to its nuclear program and tensions with the United States that date to the Trump administration. There are geopolitical tensions as well, where Iran is looking to be less isolated and sees the war as an opportunity to support Russia and play a longer a game here. So this is quite a complicated posture, but is really tied to Iran's regional isolation, perhaps the collapse of the Iran nuclear agreement, and a longer-term strategy where Iran is looking to position itself with Russia and China against the West.
Well, Dr. Vakil, you mentioned there the nuclear accord. Of course, we've got US President Biden heading to the Middle East this week. Policy with regards to Iran will be high on the agenda. And I wonder now, could Iran's apparent decision to help Moscow when it comes to its military hardware basically undercut further efforts to revive this nuclear accord?
That's a very good question. And I think that the timing of Putin's trip to Tehran next week definitely coincides coming after President Biden's very trumped up trip to the Middle East. There is an ambition with Biden's trip to forge greater regional cooperation and coordination to push back against a shared threat of missiles and drones that come from Iran. And Iran is going to be hosting Putin and Erdogan, really primarily to focus on Syria, but no doubt there will be bilateral discussions as well, where Iran again, we'll look to sort of symbolically show that it isn't isolated, and even if the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear agreement, falls to the wayside, that Iran has some strategic options to protect itself from further sanctions and from further pressure that will come from the West.
Very, very briefly, Dr. Vakil, talking about that discussion in Tehran, do you think then that Putin could try and persuade Turkey when it comes to things like the unblocking of grain, for example? Briefly, if you wouldn't mind.
I think that Putin also wants to show that he's not very isolated as well in this moment. So I think all options are on the table, but I think we shouldn't expect any breakthroughs. The fact that this discussion is taking place, being held in Tehran, but will primarily focus on regional issues.
Right.
I think those are the outcomes we should see. I don't think we should expect any breakthroughs on grain or in any other area where Putin is holding the West hostage.